In 1987, Nintendo would release a game that would run parallel to the meteoric rise of one of the greatest boxers to ever live, and this enthusiasm to capture the legacy that was being created by Mike Tyson ultimately helped create one of the greatest NES games to ever exist. We need to go back before the release of Mike Tyson's Punch-Out and look at where the game originated from. You see, Mike Tyson's Punch-Out wasn't a standalone game developed from nothing. In 1984, an arcade boxing video game named Punch-Out was released and gave us the first glimpse into some familiar opponents like Glass Joe, Ball Bull, and Mr. Sandman. Although the green-haired boxer you play is never named, people like to say this is the original Little Mac. In the same year Super Punch-Out would be released, and we'd see characters like Great Tiger, Soda Popinski, and Super Macho Man. These opponents would make their way to the NES version, being pinnacled by the world's youngest heavyweight champion in boxing history. Nintendo's research and development directly handled the creation of Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, so to port this onto the home console, they had to adjust parts of the game to make it look good for home television sets. On the arcade, there were multiple screens used to separate the actual boxing from the stats, or heads-up display used for the match and its fighters. On the NES, the power meters for both Mac and his opponents, plus health, super punches, and the time remaining in the round, were all compacted and framed at the top of the screen. Not only were the two screens originally used compacted, but Little Mac, the fighter you control, was shrunk down to a size that could be positioned in front of his opponent, where not too much of the opponent was covered, and you could still easily maneuver Mac and see what he was doing. Developers took full advantage of the space and ensured that every bit of the screen was covered during the actual matches. Over 2/3 of the screen is the ring itself, and just above is the heads-up display for the competitor's stats. The spectators are all set in a deep brown and black palette, which contrasts well with the ring's ropes, and they don't distract the player or blend in with Mac's opponents. With the mat of the ring being the most dominant area on the screen, it was important for the developers to choose colors that didn't hinder gameplay. Specific blues and greens were chosen for the rings, and none of these conflicted with the colors of the boxers or their clothing and gear. At the end of the game, they emphasize how important the final bout with Tyson is by making the ring a neon green, which really contrasts the colors of Tyson and cranks up the intimidation factor quite a bit. The music for Mike Tyson's Punch-Out fits well with the overall themes in the game. The opening song begins right after the bell rings and the crowd roars, and it gives you a glimpse of Mike Tyson himself. If you let the game play on and don't push any buttons, you'll also get a glimpse of Little Mac and his trainer Doc, and a list of your opponents by name. The music will play completely through during these screens, and it's got an uplifting and almost triumphant feel to it. The music during actual fights does a great job of not distracting the player. The low and monotone beats keep you energized, but focused. The musical segments when you knock an opponent down and when you win crescendo with positive and uplifting beats, and it really gives the player the feeling they've won an important bout. One of the most recognizable pieces of music in the game is when Mac and Doc are training through New York City, and where you receive codes to get you back into certain spots in the game. This music seems to help Mac and Doc keep pace with their training, and again, gives the player an uplifting feeling. When you get knocked down or lose a bout with an opponent, the music steps down in tone, adding to the defeated display of Mac. Sports games on the NES try their very best to get the most out of their 8-bit notes by making things uplifting for victories and somber for losses. Mike Tyson's Punch-Out delivered all of this really well with its music. Mac will ultimately face 11 different opponents, and some will be fought more than once. There are circuits that Mac must battle his way through, and they are divided by title. While Mac will encounter some opponents more than once, the second time he fights an opponent, their moves and strategies will have changed, and it's up to the player to figure out these new moves and patterns. While Mac's 11 opponents differ in looks, there are actually only 5 body types or templates used, and there's one body type that only appears once. Mac's first opponent, Glass Joe, is resurrected from the arcade version and is basically a warm-up opponent to help the players figure out game mechanics and movements. Glass Joe shares a body type with a Spanish counterpart, Don Flamenco. Their fighting styles differ greatly, and so do their color palettes, but developers found a lean body type that worked and went with it. Mac faces 2 other opponents with small frames, but square off with wider stances and are a bit broader in the shoulders. Von Kaiser, a veteran mustached fighter, and Great Tiger, an Indian mystic who can teleport around the ring. Both fighters move with a slower and more calculated approach, but they both do a great job teaching the player pattern development and how to block and dodge attacks. Punch-Out decides to increase the size and intimidation factor by pitting you against Bald Bull and Mr. Sandman. Both of these fighters have been around since the arcade releases, and the game has these 2 behemoths throw some signature moves at you that can really do some damage. 2 more opponents that cover even more real estate are Soda Popinski and Super Macho Man. These 2 tall, broad, and muscular opponents again have some signature moves that will definitely keep you on your toes, and Super Macho Man was deemed good enough to be placed as your final opponent before the dream bout with Mike Tyson. Piston Honda and Mike Tyson share the same template. These 2 fighters' body types seem to inhabit the Goldilocks zone, or being just right in size and shape. I would imagine at the time of development they didn't want Mike Tyson to be showcased in a body type like Glass Joe or Great Tiger, and a body type like Mr. Sandman or Soda Popinski may have been a bit exaggerated for what Mike Tyson was built like in real life. Tyson had a short but heavy-built frame. He never worried about being at a disadvantage with his reach because one of his greatest tactics was to work his way into his opponents, staying low and then attacking on the advantages his opponents would give him. On the game, Tyson is fighting a smaller opponent due to visual reasons set for the player, but Tyson is given very aggressive and hard-hitting moves. Developers did a great job pulling the real Mike Tyson in and replicating him on an 8-bit canvas. There is one opponent that isn't replicated, and he may be the oddest fighter with the weirdest pattern and the biggest payoff. King Hippo is an opponent with very mysterious stats and only one weakness. When you find and exploit this weakness, it's an instant knockout, and it gives the player a glimpse into how important pattern recognition really is. Games Radar ranked Mike Tyson's Punch-Out as the 11th best NES game ever made, and said something that really stuck with me. They said Mike Tyson's Punch-Out was a brilliant puzzle game disguised as a sports game. And to be honest, that's exactly what it is. Pattern recognition is everything here. Muscle memory, training your brain, getting your hand-eye coordination razor sharp. It's all critical in finishing this game and becoming a champion. Mike Tyson's Punch-Out is not a typical sports game. While Tecmo Bowl, Double Dribble, and even MLB give you large fields and courts, here you are confined to the ring, and not only that, but you are also confined to the area where Mac walks out and stands in, waiting to face his opponents. Punch-Out isn't a 3D game in the traditional sense, and you don't have the space to move around like in Ring King. Mac can only move out of his spot when he is dodging his opponents to the left or to the right, and only fully leaves his place when he's completely knocked out of it. The developers kept the controls as basic as possible, which is great for when the pressure is on. The B button controls your left arm, and the A button controls the right. When you press up on the directional pad and a button, Mac jumps up and punches. When you press down on a button, you throw a body shot, and if you press a button without touching the directional pad, you throw a straight punch. It really is amazing in its simplicity, and the game takes full advantage of a controller that has one of the most basic designs ever created. Mike Tyson's Punch-Out even gets the start button involved during the bouts. If you're able to collect a star by catching an opponent off guard, you can press the start button and Mac will rear back and deliver a very powerful punch that can really give your opponent a run for their money. Dodging an opponent only requires the directional pad. Pressing left or right will move Little Mac away from oncoming punches, and holding down enacts a block where Mac can absorb the punch. But beware, some opponents have punches that will go right through your blocks, so physically getting Mac out of the way may be your best bet. You know, Mike Tyson's Punch-Out is one of the most played games in my collection. Boxing has been around for centuries. Well, people punching each other has been. And boxing as an official sport has been with us for over 120 years now. It brings out a primal instinct we have with one another. We use it to defend our bodies, our honor, and our integrity. It is one of the most basic yet complex ways to use our hands and arms, and while the mechanics that go into it have a strong foundation, it can grow into an almost infinite spectrum of positions and strategies. There is one person whose love of boxing paralleled his dislike for video games, but eventually those lines would cross and create something extraordinarily unparalleled. My dad bought me Mike Tyson's Punch-Out and had watched me battle through its opponents countless times, trying to make it to the dream bout with Tyson. I would always offer my controller to him to let him have a go, but he would either shrug it off or laugh and tell me he'd rather watch me play. Now remember, this is a man who I watched fall after the first large jump of Super Mario Bros. And immediately put the controller down on the floor. My dad ran his own business in our little town, which meant he was there to open it in the morning and close it at the end of the day. He enjoyed the freedoms of being his own boss, but when he had an emergency or was sick, sometimes there was no one to call. It would be all on him. There was, however, an entire week my dad was at home sick. Fortunately, at the time, he had other family members and trustworthy employees watching the place for him. Dad was also lucky because we lived just a couple of minutes from his shop, so if he really needed to be there, he could go up and see what was going on. Mom was at work and my sister and I were at school, so Dad had the place to himself. He didn't want to sleep since he was worried he'd get a work-related call, and remember, there were no cell phones back at that time, so he stayed parked on the couch right next to the telephone that was mounted on the kitchen wall. He decided to occupy his time with some Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, and this would start a week-long journey that he would never forget. A man has to have a certain level of tenacity to win. Sometimes it's viewed as pride or stubbornness or even a bit of insanity. But in reality, what it can be is a hidden drive, a determination or grit that is instilled by a father to his son, a teacher to his student, or a coach to his athlete. So what advice did my dad take? What primary lesson did he use that was given to him by his father, his teachers, and his coaches? Don't ever give up. After grinding through every fighter and collecting codes to go back to face them again if needed, he made it to the dream bout with Mike Tyson. Now that he had Tyson's legendary code, it was just a matter of defeating Kid Dynamite. But there's a reason that the legends of Tyson's difficulty exist. Defeating Tyson is very difficult, and most people give up after the first 90 seconds of round 1, because this is where Mike can hit you with a single punch, draining all of your power and sending you crashing into the spectators. But Dad was not about to give up. If every other opponent could be beaten, then and so could Tyson. Mike Tyson's punches have been clocked at a fraction of a second, and his patterns are not always definitive. While there are visual cues to aid you against Tyson, fighting him is something you almost have to feel. It's an instinct, as primal as boxing in its truest form. And Dad wasn't fighting a man, he was fighting a machine disguised as one. And that machine was programmed to win at all costs. And in the end, Dad won. He would defeat Mike Tyson and earn the titles and accolades given by one of the best games to ever be created for the NES. He showed us that with time, patience, and the will to win, all of us can become undisputed heavyweight champions of a masterpiece. Promise.